Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. And today, as promised by the title of this video, we're gonna delve deep into the concept and the lyrics of this incredible album. Opeth's Still Life, released in 1999, one of Opeth's masterpieces, a sprawling concept album that came just before the release of Blackwater Park. At the time, it didn't do that much, but I'm so glad that this album was rediscovered after Blackwater Park exploded in 2001 and is now considered one of the great masterpieces of prog metal or metal in general. I won't spoil if this is my favorite Opeth album because I am going to do a ranking. And it always amazed me how Michael Ackerfeld, at such a young age, also he pointed out in various interviews how at that time he was really broke and living in this really small apartment with living on tinned tuna and with basically nothing. He made from scratch this incredible piece of work, which is so intricate musically, so intricate and elaborate in terms of the lyrics. And you gotta keep in mind that this guy, I mean, English wasn't even his first language, and there are some incredibly intricate and complex passages here. So, yeah, without further ado, let's dive in to the concept of this album, starting with the first track, The Moor. So, this album opens up with The Moor, and this track isn't particularly filled with action, but it does really set the stage and explain the story of the protagonist, so we can start understanding a little bit more about his character. Also, it doesn't really reference exactly which stage in history, which point in history we are focusing on. But I mean, if I were to make an educated guess based on the religious fervor that the characters portray in the story, and given also looking at the photos in the booklet, to me, it sounds as this was based roughly in the Middle Ages. Now, our protagonist is someone who has been exiled from his hometown. He was banished because he was considered a heretic. Actually, he was more of an atheist, and so he didn't align with the Christian faith of the town and of the church, and therefore he was banished. 15 years later, the protagonist decides to return to his hometown to reconnect with his old love Melinda, which he had to leave behind just before he had been banished. And now the protagonist in the song is drenched and filled with absolute anger, and all of the painful memories just flow back to him. Memories of a time where he was in his hometown and persecuted by his own neighbors and the people of a town and the church just because he was an atheist and he refused to align with a Christian belief. Now, the protagonist, I think, beautifully describes himself in this particular line. I was fallen, tainted, devoid of faith, wearing my death mask at birth. In the sense that when he was born, because he was an atheist, he already had a red mark on his forehead. In the sense that he was already branded as a heretic. Another line that to me is very impactful is the hands of God, decrepit and thin, meaning that in his case, the word of God, the hands of God, never really touched him, unlike with other people in the community. People in the community that described him as an outcast with dogmas forged below. And that to me represents the fact that to the other people, his dogmas, his ideas were forged in hell because they didn't understand how he could be different and not align with the Christian belief. Therefore, he was branded a Jonah with fevered blood. Jonah is a prophet in the Bible, I believe, who defied God, and therefore he was associated with this character. Anyway, all this anger and all this pain suddenly clears when he thinks about Melinda. And there's this beautiful passage in the song where everything softens, and there's this acoustic piece with Michael Ackerfeld singing over it. And he says, "There is no forgiveness in these eyes for any of you but one. Dispel the mist, for now. Melinda is the reason why I've come." So I always imagined the protagonist watching the town from further up beyond, embedded in this red mist. Everything is dark and brooding, and suddenly the mist dispels, and he now feels a small flame ignite in himself, and all that anger for a moment fades away. But that was just a flickering, feeble moment of peace, because in 1 second, all the anger just comes flooding back to the protagonist. The music becomes heavy again, and the protagonist refers to Melinda as water drops over the pyre, meaning that she was probably the only person in the entire world who could soothe his anger, who could quench his anger. But again, Michael uses the words water drops. He doesn't use the word flood over the pyre, in the sense that, yeah, she could probably soothe his internal fire, but not extinguish it completely. That was just impossible. But anyways, we're now moving on to the second track, Godhead's Lament. So, in this second song, Godhead's Lament, the protagonist enters the village for the first time, determined to find Melinda. Although he is starting to have some doubts and really fearing what might happen to him if he was discovered by the guards and all the terrible consequences he might face. But in the end, he pursues Melinda, and in the end, he finds her at the local church. And in that moment, their eyes meet for the very first time. And now there is this wonderful lyric at the end of the song that perfectly portrays this moment. And Michael Ackerfeld goes on saying, "In crumbling faith, I saw her, bearing her pain in the wilderness, the gleam of her eyes in the moment she knew." Because in that moment, she knew. She had recognized him. So she knew that he was back for her. But not only that, this part of the song reveals something actually pretty incredible to the protagonist, and that is that Melinda, in these 15 years, she had become a nun. Even though she senses that her faith is crumbling. It's like as if someone had forced her in that position, and her faith wasn't really that strong. She felt really hesitant in that position. So the song ends here, and we're about to enter the third track, Benighted. So this short 3-minute acoustic piece is basically about the protagonist and Melinda meeting for the first time in a safe and secure environment where they can talk. And the protagonist tries to convince Melinda to run away with him. He points out that he barely recognizes her, that the flame that once ignited her eyes long ago was gone, and he thinks that it's because of what she has become. She has become a nun, not out of her own will, but out of fear of the community, out of fear of the people, out of fear of the church. So he tries to convince her to give up her vows, escape with him, and recapture that old flame that she had lost, that desire to live that she had lost. And this is beautifully captured in the lyrics. Come into the night when days are done, lost and astray in what's vanished from your eyes. And again, what came and distorted your sight, saw you benighted by your fright. The idea that she was afraid. She was afraid of the people, she was afraid of the church, and that's what drove her in becoming a nun. And that leads us to the next track, Monlapse, Vertigo. Monlapse, Vertigo, the protagonist realizes that the infamous Council of the Cross is on the hunt and looking for him. And They have sensed that he is back and he isn't safe anymore. Across the leafy pathway, their deeds smeared in blood, for all to behold, the council of the cross must have sensed my coming, the pest through the air, with despise for squalor lashing out of the poor. So this portrays how the council of the cross sees him like a pest in the air, an infection of the waters. And so in that moment, he realizes that both him and Melinda aren't safe anymore and that he must escape with Melinda to a more secure environment. So, in Face with Melinda, the two protagonists have escaped in what they feel is a secure environment. And this is the song where the feelings that Melinda has towards the protagonist finally come to life at the end of the song. But in the beginning of the song, Melinda is described as this very brooding and sad creature that has been almost subdued by the church and her belief. She is not herself anymore, but at the same time, it appears that her will to stay true to her word, to stay true to her vows, is unshaken. This to me is perfectly described in the phrase, words would falter to atone, meaning that her words, her devotion to God is unshakable. And another thing that surprises me very much is even though the character clearly is in love with Melinda, she absolutely despises what she has become. She absolutely despises the figure of the nun, the fact that she is associated with the church, and understandably, given how much the protagonists have had suffered in the past due to the Catholic Church. And still is suffering since he's been persecuted. But I mean, so much. This hatred goes so far that he describes the professions of the nun as a harlot of God upon the earth, which is a very strong, phrase to use. But anyways, at the end of the song, Melinda's feelings finally come to life. So even though her promise and her faith to God is unshaken, she reveals at the end of the song that she also is in love with him. And this comes across in the last paragraph where Mikhail writes, endlessly gazing in nocturnal prime, she spoke of her vices and broke a rhyme, but baffled herself with a final line. My promise is made, but my heart is thine. So, my promise to God was made, but at the same time, my heart is yours. And from here, we move on to the next song, Serenity Painted Death. Up till now, Face of Melinda has been definitely the most uplifting part of the story. The protagonists have revealed their love for one another, but unfortunately, from now on, things are going to go way downhill. Now, what happens, supposedly, is that the two protagonists sleep together, but in the morning, the male protagonist wakes up to find that Melinda is no longer by his side. So, returned from a hibernal dream, voices fell like marble, no longer by my side, gone all that would linger. And then in the next few lines of the story, we will find out what had happened to Melinda. Ripped from my embrace, Melinda, reflected in shafts, red line round her neck, met the earth in silence. Now, that red line round her neck, I think, implies and mentions the rope that she had around her neck, leaving a scar. And that means, of course, that she was ultimately hanged for having slept with the main protagonist and hence having broken her vows to God. Now, what I feel is really interesting is the title of the song, Serenity Painted Death, because it beautifully portrays what is happening in the story. Since we pass from a moment of total serenity where the two characters are reunited to a moment of tragedy. But not only that, it's the serenity that paints death. Because if the guards hadn't found the two characters sleeping together in that moment of serenity, then probably Melinda wouldn't have been hanged for breaking her vow to God and to the church. So the two words are strictly connected, and that to me is really fascinating. It's fascinating. It's a great title. Anyway, at the end of the song, after learning that Melinda has been hung, the protagonist goes through an utter moment of complete rage and kills every guard and every person he sees. And in the end, he's exhausted and falls down to his knees. Now, unfortunately, the end is quickly drawing near for our protagonist. He, after killing all of these guards, he is totally exhausted. He falls on his knees, he passes out, and when he wakes up, he finds himself surrounded by the guards. Came with the moon, the wayward in conscious state, flanked and barrened in destiny's end. So, in the end, he has been captured, and so we're now moving on to the last song of the album, White Cluster. The sands of time are running low, unfortunately, for our protagonist, and in this last song, White Cluster, he is brought to the gallows pole where he will be facing the same fate as his beloved Melinda. And those last terrible moments of agonizing breath, he sees an image of Melinda beckoning him to join her in death. Now, this could well be, of course, a figment of his imagination, but if you want to give a more spiritual twist to the story, this could actually be Melinda calling him to join her, and this would make, of course, the ending more bittersweet, and it would make this another story where two unfortunate lovers that could not be together in life were in the end reunited in death. So this concludes this story and of this incredible masterpiece from Opeth. Now, of course, I based all this information from of course, sources I found on the internet, but mainly my own interpretation of the lyrics. So bear in mind that I may have missed something, or you may disagree with something I said in the story. So please tell me in the comments if you think there is something important I should have added. So, this concludes the video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. And bear in mind that there's gonna be lots more Opeth content. There's gonna be a ranking. So, stay tuned. Stay tuned, subscribe, ring the bell so that you can be notified anytime a new video is uploaded. Until next time, see you.